So at this point we are recording, and what I want to do is make sure that everyone has access to both the presentation files. So you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint if you're interested. It will be on the website. And then, because we realize not everybody has time right now to listen in, if you want to listen to the full webinar, we always do try to record those. So what I'm going to be giving today is really big picture information. We did a very in-depth hemp webinar, I guess last year, and during that time we were looking at, okay, what parts are eligible, you know, how did the law change, the history of hemp in the US over the last 100 years and kind of what evolved. And so we did a whole bunch of things related to that on that webinar, and so you can listen to that if you're wanting more detail than what's provided today. I will hit on a few of the things that we covered before, just in case if this is new, but the focus this time really is looking at big picture across the United States, how you can know what your state is doing, how you can know there's some resources and places that you can check to understand what exactly is happening in your state. But this is really going to be kind of a deep dive across the country of what the last year and a half has really looked like for hemp, and hopefully the information will be helpful. So again, just as a reminder, go to that there at the archive website page. At the bottom is the hemp production one, and you can learn all that you want from that. So I do, and a lot of the slides I have more. I'm not really going to be reading the slides, but I have a lot more information. If you wanted to read more of more information about whatever it is that I'm talking about, there's a link on each page of where exactly I got the information from. So that's intentional, just so that you can first of all know that I am completely copying from these particular sources, so that you can see exactly what the data is showing out there. So I've referenced articles, we've referenced websites, just all different resources that you could learn more, but I'm just pulling out what I think is really key for this. So in 2014, there's a farm bill every 4 years. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but each one of these, Congress will kind of focus on different things or just renew particular programs that they have. But in 2014, Congress took a different step to kind of clarify what they considered hemp policy. And so I've got too many screens open, so let me move this over so I can see my screen. So they were kind of changing what they considered hemp policy. So they clarified part of the Controlled Substances Act, which basically allowed that industrial hemp could be part of an agriculture pilot program. So some of your states started, like Kentucky, for example, there's a few states that started pilot programs way back in 2014. Most states did not. But it also, during this farm bill, they drew a distinction between hemp and marijuana and said that hemp, any such part of the plant with the concentration of THC lower than, not more than 3%, could be considered something that could be used for hemp research. It could protect its cultivation, and it didn't really say anything about the processing of hemp or the manufacture or distribution of sale. It was really just to get states to be able to begin to kind of start their own program to look at how to grow it and look at how, what they needed. And so that was in 2014. 2018, again, way more than I'm going to read, but you can see exactly what the Farm Bill said. It kind of took a look at the gaps that they had in the 2014 bill and clarified that, said, okay, not only can you kind of do these pilot programs, but we can also start some hemp products. You can start, we can start doing some processing. And so they had this huge, there were very few hemp provisions put in the huge farm bill, but what it said was that it would amend the Controlled Substances Act, it would remove hemp from the definition of marijuana, and it would list THC as a Schedule I controlled substance, and it created this exemption for THC and hemp as long as it was below a certain percentage. So this really opened the states to say, okay, not only can we do these pilot programs, we can actually now start creating hemp products and using. So that's when a lot of us started seeing CBD oils all over the place and started hearing more about hemp. And so this is, some states in 2018, we're already at the point to be able to kind of start more official production and cultivation across the states in different ways. Other ones stood back and said, hey, we're not really interested in this. We want to see where this is going. But across the country, there's a different patchwork of what it looks like. But it all started with these two farm bills. So we know that hemp and marijuana are two very different, they're part of the same species, but they have different, they're very different plants and they're grown different ways. And so hemp can grow as high as 20 feet. A lot of times it's grown outdoors. It can cross-pollinate. As long as it contains that 0.3% less of that THC, the moment it gets over that, it has to be destroyed, which can be challenging for farmers. It can grow in most climates, and you can bunch them together, and you can kind of, it doesn't require as much care as marijuana does. So marijuana is the female plant. It's shorter, it resembles a bush, and they're really wanting those leaves and the buds of the marijuana plant. And so they've got 5 to 35% THC. You know, the side effects, but your growth has to be very different. It has to be in an isolated, warm, humid area. They don't want cross-pollination. A lot of times you see it grown in greenhouses or in very controlled areas. So you've got two different plants, but sometimes, you know, hemp growers may have a field of hemp that someone may go by and say, oh, wow, I just found a field of marijuana. And so sometimes it's stolen because they think it's marijuana, but we're looking at two completely different plants. And when I first started looking into hemp, I didn't realize just how many things that can be made from hemp. There was an interesting, when we did the first hemp webinar, there was a quote that at one point they were looking at using hemp instead of lumber for all sorts of uses. And they said, we think we can save our trees if we use this instead. And then some things happened and that didn't really come to fruition. But so there are the hemp seeds. You can take a look and see that it can be used for food. It can be used in dairy products. The shell can be used for flour, for bakery products. The oil can be used for personal care products, for fuel, for paint. The crushing, once it's crushed, what they call the hemp cake, can be used in food or beer or feed. And then there's this whole area of fiber. This can be used in the fabric, insulation, carpeting, paneling, cordage for ropes, pulps, recycling additive. It can be used to make bags for fiberboard. And then they have, so the stalk itself is very, very strong. And so there's this whole process that they have to do to kind of break it down. But it can be used in compost and mortar and paper filler as an absorbent bedding. We're seeing it as animal feed. And so you can see that this one plant has just so many different uses. And so you think, well, what does this have to do with ID&R? One of the things that's really important is for it to qualify for us, it has to be part of that initial processing. And initial processing in all of these different areas looks a little bit different. And so some of your hemp farmers may be growing for, they may be growing for a CBD market. Some may be growing for a completely different market. Some right now, they have a shortage in some places of seeds. And so the seed is really what they're trying to grow in the seed for the same type of climate for their area. Like seeds in Arizona that came from Canada, those seeds that came from Canada may not work very well in Arizona. So this is a new area where we don't have as many resources. And so one of the things that you'll want to do is figure out in your state, what is hemp grown for? What is the market? Where is it going? And what is the process? And so this outcome of what the final product is, the process is a little bit different for a lot of these. So you see that, the hemp is grown a lot skinnier. A lot of the skinny leaves concentrated towards the top. It grows in most climates. Again, you can see, marijuana has this controlled atmosphere. And then it's saying, hemp is extremely versatile, used in beauty and skincare, clothing, cars, construction. And you can kind of see there's a real chance that this could be something that really grows, but there's always an up and down to everything. So it says here, industrial hemp is the fastest growing crop in U.S. agriculture. It says before 2015, hemp was virtually non-existent in the terms of U.S. agriculture because of the Controlled Substances Act, which we talked about. So it says here, they lumped it along with all cannabis plants, and in 1970 as a Schedule I substance with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. So that's why it didn't go anywhere. But then with this new Farm Bill, it says when the Farm Bill opened in 2014, the following year there were 1,500 acres of hemp were planted in the U.S. Today there are nearly 100 times that, and you can kind of see the numbers just continue to grow. So I've got a little bit of a map here that just shows, the number of of acres that have been planted, and you can kind of see your state. Like Texas, for example, is one that just opened up. They just kind of came around with new rules for what you can do in Texas. I live in Tennessee. Tennessee and Kentucky have had a lot of production. You can see a lot of the states that were tobacco states before have moved to hemp. It's been a natural progression for farmers as tobacco has struggled to go into hemp. And some of the farmers are going in for different reasons. Montana is a big, huge area for that. And so we'll talk a little bit about, what's the factors of why some farms are converting to hemp and what are some of the challenges that they're facing. If you have any questions, again, feel free to put it in the chat box. I will pay attention to that. And just to make sure that, that I'm not just rambling in front of my computer and you have a question and I'm not answering it. So here's kind of a little bit bigger of, you can see, these acres of more than 2,000 in certain places. They've got pretty, decent size. And in other places, your states are just very much beginning the process. And it's not something you're seeing really, some of you may say, hey, I'm seeing more than this, but it may be, very, very small production. So Montana is the largest. It has more than twice the acreage of the second place state, Colorado. And there was a quote which I found really interesting by this particular farmer. He says, there's a lot of good land and a lot of good farmers. And so this guy has about 1,500 acres of varying crops, about 60 miles from Glacier National Park. And he said that a little bit farther down, it says, his farm sits in a region known as the Golden Triangle because of the abundance of wheat farms. Johnson said that 600 acres of hemp he planted in 2019, up from 300 the previous year, might otherwise have been covered in wheat or barley, but those commodity prices have been going way down. And so hemp became an appealing alternative. And so he says that these other crops, for them, the reason they're getting in is because wheat and barley and corn and soybeans, those markets are really tanking. And so that's been why there has been this interest in getting into hemp. And so each state, I find that it's very interesting of why people are getting into it. And it's a lot of times it's a lot of different factors. And so some of the kind of, if you want to Google and learn a little bit more about the real challenges that they're facing, these were probably the top 5. And this was from an article that Forbes had of just, a year ago, they were saying hemp is the answer. This is where we can go. This is the cash cow for American agriculture at this point. And then a year later, these were some of the headlines of, what's happening. So first thing, these, you go out, you're going to go ahead and plant. They find out that their yields are not quite what they expected. Growing hemp is very labor intensive in certain parts of it than other crops. Some of the hemp seed that they thought was going to be really good for CBD turned out to not be good. Thieves are stealing hemp plants thinking is marijuana, and too much hemp is being produced and no new markets for farmers to unload it. So one of the articles that I have seen just over and over and over in the last year is so many farms went ahead and jumped in and started producing, not sure who they were going to produce for. Some places have contracts already. So that if you're growing, you're particular in your area, you have a contract. I know Kentucky has a lot of the Tennessee. You have a contract to sell to a certain place, a certain amount. And other places kind of jumped in with the hopes that hearing that the market was so hot that they for sure would get somebody, but then at the end, there was too much. So one of the comments is, what about saturation? That has been the case in some places. Some states have very much stood back and said, let's let the market really kind of normalize a little bit before we jump in. But again, it depends, state by state. So a little bit more about the information as far as how labor intensive. It says that many farms don't have the right equipment. And so they're having to retrofit, other farm equipment that they have to be able to efficiently see this process from seed to harvest. It says, although some hemp croppers say they have been able to use modern machinery to get the job done, others have had to invest tens of thousands of dollars in equipment. And because certain types of hemp plants must be put in the ground as seedlings, a lot of work goes into producing it, and it's got to be done by hand. And so somebody is by hand putting, these plants in the ground. It says in some states they're asking to have buyers before they're giving them licenses. Yes. So we'll talk a little bit about the requirements that every state is responsible to come up if they're going to grow hemp in their state to submit a plan to the Department of Agriculture, and that plan can be either accepted or rejected, or it has to be modified. And so it really looks very different. Some of them you're not even allowed to have a license before you go through this approval process. Some, in order to have a license, you have to have a market. Some, it's just like the Wild West. You can just apply for a license and you can just go ahead and kind of navigate, but it is very different. And I will show you a resource where you can take a look at your own state laws and what it looks like. So, the plant itself, germination is about 1 to 2 weeks. So we've got places, earlier this year, I was doing some research for a state, And it was interesting because I'd work with a different state, and this particular state was growing a lot of the seedlings that were being shipped to other states because states couldn't find enough seed. And then if they couldn't find enough seed, sometimes they were just growing the plants. They were getting the plants shipped from another place. And so they were trying to ship it from a state that had the similar type of, weather and, soil, so that the plants would be compatible. But so you've got this seed germination for 1 to 2 weeks, and you have the seedling, and then you have what they call the vegetative state, and then they have flowering, and then they have harvesting. And depending on what your hemp product is going to be used for, you may be harvesting the buds, or you may be harvesting the seeds, or you may be just using more of the stalks. So ideally, you're wanting to use as much as you possibly can, but most farmers are growing for one market or another. And so you can kind of see that it's going to take a little bit. So reminding of all of these different things, maybe I'm growing it for the paper industry, or maybe I'm really focused on the beauty industry. So you can see it's going to be very different of where these markets are, and states are kind of looking at different types of markets of where, what's happening and where it's going. So here are currently in 2019 acres by state. So you can see Montana had 44,000 acres. This is 2019, so the projections are still coming out this year of where we're going to be. And then right now is just really a crazy time for farmers in general. So it'll be interesting to see if any of this is, with the pandemic, if any of that plays in. But you can kind of see here's the state. So some of the states have very limited amounts. And like Nebraska right now, I just read a whole bunch of articles about the projections that they're expecting it to really take off in 2020. So some of your states, really don't have hardly any going on, and then all of a sudden you're going to see this year they've changed policies, or they've got their states, now they've decided to jump in this market, and so you may see, really exponential growth, or you may just see, minimum acres, of what's happening. So U.S. farmers have been licensed to grow. You can see all the, so many acres of marijuana, but they've also now had a 455% increase over the 2018 levels. So you can see that's a lot of growth that they're expecting to continue to increase. So 13 states in 2019 enacted new hemp legalization laws. And so some, you can see in some of the green, it's like it was okay to go ahead and cultivate. Some of the places they were just, like the orange, they're cultivating already, and some of them they're doing their tests. It just depends. And so there is a website, which I'll show you, that you can go in and kind of read those and see. So here's a few of the big picture states that are kind of getting bigger. So taking a look at where we are in 2020, says Colorado projections have the state at roughly 50,000 acres of hemp by the end of 2019. Oregon had 25% more growers licensed for 2019 than the 2018. So you can kind of see this is, getting bigger. Kentucky thought they would have 5 times more hemp farmers and triple the approved acreage in 2019 compared to 2018. Tennessee reported more than 12 times what they had in 2018. So you can kind of see that this was, and Montana continued to grow. And this Hemp Industry Daily is a great resource. I'll show you the website in just a little bit, but they put all sorts of information about each state and what's happening. Other growth, which was kind of smaller, but these are new states kind of stepping in. North Carolina licensed 634 growers. Vermont granted 427 registrations to produce roughly 2,711 acres of hemp. And Alabama had its first hemp season in 2019, which attracted 180 farmers and 70 processors. So some of the states, their focus has also been on who are going to be the processors. I don't just want, I don't just want growers. I need to know where this is going. And there are states that are still not allowing it to be grown. And yes, there are just 3 states right now that are not allowing it to be grown. So you can kind of see some of these states are saying, yes, this is full out hemp cultivation. Other ones have given out. And the cultivation may be that it's a pilot program and they're testing out different areas. They're testing out how to get seed, or they're testing out how the different types of seed. Canada is a big producer of where we get a lot of our seed right now because they've been growing it for years. And so we have a real problem of the right kind of seed for different states. So states are doing all different types of cultivation projects, a lot of times with land grant universities, and then other ones have just growers licenses, and they've got full out production in different places. And so here is, let me see if I can click on this and kind of show you what this website looks like. So this is from the NCSL, National Conference of State Legislators. They have the statutes for each state. And so when you kind of scroll down, it'll give you where you can take a look at your state and say, okay, what's happening depending, and see which particular, what are the rules. And then it'll give you a little bit of the difference. So you can say, for example, Alabama, and there creates this, an industrial hemp research program overseen by the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries to study hemp. The department may coordinate the study with institutions of higher education. But then you can take a look, other states like Arizona, it says, you know, allows for commercial hemp production, processing, and manufacturing. So you can take a look at each state and kind of see where you are, you know, what's happening. Some are allowing, you know, like Maine, for example, allows hemp growing for commercial purposes, establishes a license for seed distributors. Every state's just a little bit different. You know, Kentucky has all of these different programs where it says, you know, creates a hemp research program and a commercial licensing program. The commercial license shall only be allowed subject to the, you know, has their rules. Growers are required to use certified seeds and may import or resell certified seeds. And so then you see this 5-year hemp research program, and then they have a hemp commission. So it looks very different than maybe what is happening in Kansas or in Iowa. And so you can be, this site is a great place to be able to go and just kind of see what's happening in your particular state. It says main changes that happened in 2019 was we did get new USDA ag rules on hemp legalization regulations. Now these went out to states and their public comment has been accepted through January, and states were also allowed to say, well, you know, we're going to go ahead and take the new USDA rules, or we're going to wait a year and use our adopted rules first. And so states are using different things. Hemp farmers for a while were not eligible for federal crop insurance, and that was holding back some areas where they're saying, hey, unless they're eligible for this crop insurance, we're not going to see the growth that we need to see. The Federal Credit Union Administration clarified that credit unions were allowed to maintain accounts for hemp businesses. So for a while, they were not allowed. They were having a real problem with getting loans. And the EPA announced that they would be reviewing applications for pesticides to be used on hemp crops. And then the FDA at the same time is considering ways which hemp-derived CBD can be allowed in food products and nutritional supplements. So this is all happening with hemp in 2019. So since the Farm Bill passed, the regulators worked on these rules for the industry. And like here in this, and they were really concerned for a while saying, we don't have these rules. And in the meantime, states were required to make their own rules. So states worked on their rules, went ahead and submitted them, and then have been kind of waiting on what happens with these USDA rules compared to what the state said that they were going to use. They also were, in August of 2019, the DEA sent a notice to law enforcement across the country that hemp was not a controlled substance and that they were not required to register or grow or manufacture it. And so in some states they were requiring that. So they just said that, you know, some states were having to, some farmers were having to kind of defend themselves and say, look, this is hemp, this is not marijuana. And so it just, the DEA sent this notice, and so a lot of farmers said that was very helpful. So with the crop insurance, that allowed growers that produce hemp for fiber, flour, or seeds for the 2020 season to be able to have that crop insurance. And it now provides coverage under the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program, and cultivators who are part of a state or university researchers will also have access to that. So that was something that they were really wondering, saying, hey, we don't have this crop insurance, we're wanting to expand, you know, what's going to happen with that. So this particular website just kind of showing what, you know, the particular acreages and, you know, who's really growing. And so these were some of the top 5 producers was Montana, Colorado, Oregon, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And so then you see the next ones following behind. You've got Oregon, you know, then this is according to the 10 states with the highest number of licenses as of September 1st. So states, again, they do this a little bit different, but these were the states that had the most licenses. You can kind of see how what that looks like. So there was, in 2018, all you'd hear is there's so much demand, you know, this is really where we need to go. But then they're saying, yes, the demand is rising, but there'll come a point when the supply will outweigh the demand. And so the Secretary of Agriculture, you can see when you click on that link, if you want to, you know, read what he says, he really warned about, hey, we've got to be very careful that if we can crash this market, if it gets off too quick, And so they just, this is really a testing market. They're not sure exactly where it's going to go. And so what some of the farmers have come back is just how hard growing hemp has been. And so this one particular was from Virginia, and she said that she just had just a 1/4 acre plot of hemp, and she'd been farming 7 years, and now she manages a small farm. And she said this was the first time she'd grown hemp. And she said, we're all in the green rush. We want to grow for CBD. It's the most amazing, hyped up. So thinking but she says, I really didn't know how labor intensive it was. And she said her farm, basically they have to do everything. They've got to cut, pick, and cure it. One of the interesting things about hemp is that it has to sit and kind of rot in the field. Those that are familiar with tobacco, there's a process where it's kind of drying, but this it kind of rots and breaks down a little bit in the field. And one of the things that they really like about hemp is you can grow it in the same field over and over, because the nutrients that are taken from the soil in this process, when they're kind of rotting or retting it down, that the nutrients from the plant will go back into the soil as it's rotting. So for some of us that are always working in areas where you have, 1 year it may be chilies and then it's onions, and they're kind of rotating different crops, this is a thing that you may find a particular acreage that has been hemp 1 year, the next year it might be right back, that hemp is grown in that same place. But going back to her concern, she says, you have to pick it, cut it, and cure it. And to cure the hemp, the team hangs the plants from strips on neon orange plastic safety fence, on ceiling rafters and walls in a converting garage. She doesn't have the space or equipment to, in the plant for, to process the plant into CBD oil. And so there's other companies that can process it, but they're maxed out. One company was supposed to come and pick up the harvest, but they didn't. And they just said, we're completely booked. So this is what we're starting to see in some places. It says hemp farmers across the US are grappling with harvest challenges. You've got this erratic weather. Some of the articles talk about that when you have really long periods of drought, it can change the THC level in the plant. And so you've got, trying to make sure that your plant's not over a certain, not considered hot, it's not over that allowable amount, or it has to be completely destroyed. This has really been one of the challenges. We really haven't seen any type of production since the 40s and the 50s. So this crop is almost like starting brand new. And the young industry is going through growing pains, although it's expanding really rapidly. So they estimated that this year, you can kind of see this, this increase that they're seeing, but that many of that, they thought 90% of that was going to be for CBD products. And so since we don't have enough people to process it all, we've got a glut, we've got an oversupply of hemp biomass in the market right now. And so this article was from November of 2019, so just right last year. So that was where at the end of the year, they're saying we have too much for this, and it's not something that can just sit around for a long time. So since May, the average price of harvested CBD flowers and leaves has gone down by 50%, according to a report by Hemp Benchmarks. It says, but we haven't seen those CBD prices fall in the stores, but they have seen that biomass price fall at the farm, which seems to happen in a lot of places where the farmer really gets the hit, the middle, and the consumer is still paying the same kind of thing. It's like with milk and with a lot of different products, but who's really feeling it is the farmer. And so here are the wholesale CBD prices. And so that is the price that they're getting for their flowers, for their buds that can be turned into the CBD oil. So they're saying what they're projecting to get, it's gone down at least 53%. And so that is very concerning for those people that in the beginning of the year were putting their products, into the field and assuming that, come harvest time, they were going to get a certain amount, and now it's at least 53% down. So it says, out of a professor from University of Vermont says, hemp farmers markets have bottomed out and they don't have buyers for their products. Many farmers who jumped into the industry after the Farm Bill passed are inexperienced. It's the farmers who just came in and said, oh, there's a CBD market, I think I'll plant hemp, who really didn't have a business plan. They're probably going to be hurt the most. So there was an article from a Wisconsin hemp farmer that mentions a Wisconsin hemp farmer that he said that he really struggled. He switched to be a full-time farmer after getting hurt, and he grew 37 acres of hemp, and he had to burn 10% of those because they had tested over that 0.1% acceptable limit for THC. He said, even if I lose one plant, it's a big deal. He estimates burning 10 acres of hemp means a loss between 150 to possibly 1 million, just depending on what he could get. So you can see these articles kind of coming out in November that there were a lot of, this was really one of the first big years that they had this harvest. And so it says, you know, the real problem is now they have the harvested product and they don't have a buyer. And so you can click and read a good amount. It says 65% of U.S. hemp farmers lack a buyer for their crop this season, leaving them having few alternatives according to a July survey. So this is last year. Hemp has less infrastructure than other crops, so farmers cannot rely on selling their crop to a local grain elevator. So of course, if I have corn, if I have soybeans, I have other types of crops, I can send it somewhere and it can be processed, you know, be stored, and I can sell it to that middle person. Well, this is where we're really finding a real challenge. So some people entered on speculation, and the results could be tragic for small farmers. So it says also the 2018 Farm Bill coincided with the boom in the market for food, drink, and cosmetic products laced with CBD. So the Wall Street Journal, you know, all different companies really projected that it could grow by 16 billion, grow all the way up to 16 billion by 2025. So right now they're not exactly sure what's going to happen, but you know, they were thinking, okay, it's going to be at least $750 per profit per acre, which is way above what you're getting for soybeans. And so a lot of them went into producing hemp. And so you can kind of see last April, as farmers planted a pound of hemp biomass sold for $40. Now, as they harvest, the same amount sells for $18 to $25. So you can kind of see that it's really changed. So a fifth generation, Sam Baker, a fifth generation tobacco farmer from North Carolina, sells tobacco seed hemp and hemp seedlings. After selling millions of seedlings to growers this year, about 400 people have called him asking him how to sell their crop. His crews planted 75, 80, 90 acres and didn't know what to do with it in the end. And so you can read more about this. And then you have this whole thing of you finally get it all out there and you're getting it work, and then you're finding out that it says some of the farmers are discovering that the crop is more labor intensive, which we already talked about. As a consequence, many are exposed to everything from the mold to the danger that cultivated crops contain higher than allowed levels of THC. And as soon as it tests for that, they automatically have to be destroyed. So that is, it says a lot of times small farms cannot keep up with larger operations that sell their crops in bulk or at lower prices. Mom and pop are not going to be able to compete on this playing field. And then he mentions that hemp industry is more like canola oil than craft brewing. So a lot of, you can grow hops in a lot of places and do small scale craft brewing. You can't do that with canola. You have to have a big, huge amount of, acres to really make any money. So there are examples saying, hey, over time, we may see that these small farms are just really not going to be able to compete. So despite the difficulties, some farmers remain optimistic about this budding industry. They have farmers with established supply chains and experience report they are turning a profit. So not all is bad news. It's just those that jumped in without having the full, business plan or seeing where it was going. Meanwhile, industry professionals predict the first time many hemp farmers will leave this year after their disappointing first harvest. So they've not yet found a way to make a lot of the textiles, the papers, and the rope types of products really profitable for hemp farmers. But CBD still really is that area that they're really looking for that growth. But it still is unregulated. The FDA is still looking at exactly how it can be used. It is approved as an epilepsy treatment, but right now it's been theoretically, you can find things that say, well, this is good for anxiety, this is good for gluten, but right now they're just, they expect this to really grow, but a lot will happen depending on what the FDA regulates and says that it can be doing. Given the demand, some in the hemp industry predicted that good quality hemp would fetch around $750 an acre, like we said, and they presented it very different. And it's been very tricky, and some have really, mold again has been something that has been really, really a challenge. And then also the amount of flowers and oil that is needed for CBD. They came in thinking that they wouldn't need as much, but yet they needed a lot more. And so it's just brand new. They're just trying to figure out. And so again, there's some good articles that you can kind of see it, those links at the bottom to click if you want to learn more. So again, CBD, the lack of the prices, that 50% going down has really been something that it says in late November at one of the first public auctions of the crop, farmers hoping for a competitive market found few buyers and prices below 50 cents. Many went home with their crop unsold. And so that's, looking ahead, they're saying those that are really joining in. I found this was really interesting. So the next few slides have what those that are working directly in hemp in different ways, what their comments were of what they think looking ahead will happen. And so it's really interesting to see what state they're from and kind of what they do and then their comments. And so This is from Mark Case, who is a founder and CEO of International Hemp Auction Market in Knoxville. He said 2020 is not a year for gamblers. Rather, it will be successful only for those who are wise and prudent, who are fully integrated, and who work with a good business model. I don't know, I don't have that all in there. It says, I predict that while the regulations remain non-existent, the industry will become more saturated with smaller players. However, if and when the Food and Drug Administration does come in with their regulations, because right now they were taken out for public comment, and now they're looking at state rules, and says many of these existing companies will not be able to withstand the cost of investment to keep up with regulations. In turn, cost of product and hemp will go back up, and the arena will have a lot less players. So he's expecting that that will make it so that there'll be, in the end, there'll be less players and the prices will be up. Looking at an executive from Canada, he's expecting more increase in Canada, and they're looking at how to use the whole plant instead of, but again, they've been doing this for a while. And it says United Nations International Commission on Narcotic Drugs will remove low THC exempt extractions from the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which they think will open the market to other states. And there also are other countries. I found this interesting. They predict an increase in the sale of hemp protein concentrate and hemp protein isolate for food processing. And that's something we're not anywhere near that in the United States, but that's something that Canada is looking forward to. This is from a hemp consultant in Montana. Again, hemp is, their #1 state. She says, buckle up, we're unstoppable. She thinks collaborations are really key, and I think we're going to go beyond concerns about my product has to be the best. I think we're going to be collaborating of science, location, products, ingredients for very effective healing experience and strong business plans. So she's coming from a different perspective. Now this is coming from a farmer in Nevada. He says, we've already grown this year like 8 times more hemp than we needed. The consumer hemp market is not nearly as robust as people predicted it to be, so I see a whole lot of real cheap hemp getting cheaper. You can already see the perspectives are really different depending on who you're talking to. This is from Ray Mazzi, who is in charge of hemp industries of Florida and Tallahassee. The hemp industry will surely experience explosive growth, and as the USDA and FDA begin to release rules, take comments, and eventually implement, compliance and learning from others' mistakes will prove to be invaluable to the hemp operators, regardless of where they sit in the supply chain. So this one's from Las Vegas, from a professor at the University of Nevada, and she said, I think a lot of farmers are going to realize that the cannabis plant is not a CBD plant. What we're going to see is a movement towards a trifecta or even a quad usage plant. So something that's used for the herd, so different parts of the plant, for the fiber, for the flower, for the roots, for the grain. And once we realize what those genetics are, so she's saying we don't even have this plant yet, we'll end up realizing that each region specifically has growing styles that would be differentiated by the genetics of that region. And as we move forward into a place where processing will include not just CBD, I think CBD will become the byproduct of the cannabis plant. So I found it just very interesting how the perspectives are so, this one is specifically looking at the actual plants and saying we need a plant that we can use for all different types of potential, resources that this plant could offer, but we don't have this yet. This is from a Family Agriculture Resource Management Service in Charlotte, North Carolina. So 2020 will bring more stabilization to hemp farmers as they enter the planting season. Due to the extensive loss suffered by many small farmers who grew hemp this year, many will grow less acres and seek out securing purchase contracts with established processors and companies in California, Colorado, and international markets if possible. Many farmers that suffered unrecoverable loss will not plant next year, but wait until 2021 to ensure those regulatory kinks have been ironed out. Farmers of color will have more opportunities growing cannabis due to the 10-year felony restriction on hemp, excluding many farmers of color out of the industry who factually have higher prior conviction rates. So you can see people's concerns are very different. And this is from Brent Williams. He's a managing member of Highwater Financial in Nashville. He said, we believe that the hemp industry will have a large focus on expanding infrastructure in 2020. Farmers will see a painful loss of both money and crops from the 2019 season due to limited access to drying, proper storage, or timely processing. With many farmers getting burned on production contracts in 2019, we also believe there will be a slower growth rate in the number of acres grown until there's an actual tangible increase in demand. And this was from Hemp Synergetics, a co-founder in Pittsburgh. I don't know how to say his last name, so I won't try to destroy it, but his first name's Russ. He says, with increased regulatory compliance on the horizon, I expect many of the first wave farmers, extractors, and product manufacturers to exit the business. Those who jumped in the industry without any real experience in farming, extraction science, or CPG, which is customer packaged goods, will be challenged to compete successfully in a regulatory industry or changing landscape. The second wave is coming in 2020 and the market will level out, but only the most qualified and advanced will be positioned to succeed to serve the market with high quality products. So here's a little bit of rules on the states as far as where they are, of what rules they're using. Some are still using 2014, some are using 2000, the final rules. So these green states are operating on 2014 pilot rules. The lighter green have states with an approved plan under the interim final rule. Some have their plans under review by USDA, the peach colored ones. Some are drafting plans right now. Some hemp production is completely considered illegal and other ones were unknown. So you can kind of see. And so they're really wondering what will happen. And so a lot of these states are, you can see, Montana has approved plan for 2020. And so you can kind of see what's happening there. It says we did have two big kind of real concern to several places where some of the larger processors, there were two processors in Kentucky that filed for bankruptcy. And so this has, kind of echoing some of the things that we saw throughout 2019. There were, one of them was Gincana, and they're kind of reorganizing and continuing to do business, but they're completely reorganizing. And then there was one other one that also, I think this mentions both of them. So they have two of them that another company, Sunstrand, they both filed for bankruptcy in February. And says among the largest U.S. processors of hemp fiber, Sunstrand filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy a month earlier. The company styled itself as a sustainable materials manufacturer, which converted raw hemp fiber for applications including plastics, papers, and animal bedding. Though many hemp operators expect 2020 to be a big year, Sunstrand's closure and the lack of fiber processing facilities nationwide kind of throws shade on what's happening with the industry. So this is not, I feel like it's kind of depending on your state and depending on what avenues they've taken and what is actually, what their market is and where they're getting their seed for, and are they growing plants for other states, or are they, doing like Maine, for example, has, the seed is one of their focuses. I would encourage you to visit what's happening in each one of your states. And so one of my favorite places to go is what's called Hemp Industry Daily. And they do news by topic. So they have a whole news section on how the coronavirus is, looking at CBD and just what's happening. But then they also have, hemp fiber and grain news, but then they have news by state. So you can take a look and say, I wonder what's happening in my state. And they will give you very recent, pretty much lots of things that are happening with your state. Some of it are older, some of it's new, just depending on what's happening in your state. And so this is one of my favorite places to go and kind of keep up with. You can also sign up for their newsletter, and you can kind of select what information you need, and it'll just come directly to you. And so that is one of the places that I like to kind of keep up with what's going on. So you can see there's just a lot of things happening. I feel like hemp can be one of those things that you can see in your state that really turns out to be something, that you're seeing workers come from. I know in the state of Tennessee, there's been a lot of movement. I've run into families myself that I used to know from the program that say, well, we know people that are working, they don't call it hemp because they just say they're working in marijuana. There is no, so I'll ask more information and they'll say, oh yeah, it winds up being hemp in different places. And so I've seen movement myself from, what traditionally was the tobacco moving families that are now working in hemp. But every state is so incredibly different that it's, and that what's causing more growers to come in and out and due to your infrastructure. So I just really encourage you to learn more about your growers. If you can go to the meetings of the growers in your state and see what's happening once we're all, allowed to go back out, or even now is a perfect time to reach out and find out. So I know like Kentucky, for example, they have, they're looking at who are the registered growers and are working with them. And so, every state, it's very different, but go back and learn and look at what your state, where your state is in this, which one are you? And I hope that, this information in these places, the articles will be something that will be beneficial, but this rule, as far as, if I can find the slide, it was a while ago, I guess, about going back and looking at your state itself, this one, very much I think has got some good information if you click on that and really learn a little bit more about what your state rules are, and then you can kind of go in a little bit deeper. So questions, comments? I'm going to go ahead and stop recording this for now. I think we're at a good place to stop that. Let's see. Yeah.